Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast, and welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
We all have them in our hometowns, sometimes in the places that we eventually move to. What are the local legends where you live, /x/ in this thread? Lesser-known urban legends.
Brunswick County and Columbus County, North Carolina. Back in the early 80s to mid-90s, it was a real rat hole. Nothing but rednecks and inbreds. I was born there and lived out about 18 years of my life on the border between the two counties. The woods around that area are incredibly thick. Nothing but long-leaf pines and all sorts of hardy bushes grow there. The woods are very dark and foreboding as far as most of the North Carolina woods I've seen. Anyways, I've got two legends. From Columbus County, there was this rumor of an old guy who used to run a still out in the woods. The majority of Columbus County was abandoned during the recessions in the 1970s. Entire little towns have been abandoned, especially around Waccamaw region. They say that this old man brewed some pretty strong stuff and was in competition with a couple of other hicks around the area for selling their cheap moonshine. This old guy camped out very close to his still and had a shack not far from it. One day in late fall, a group from a competing still got together and decided to smash up all the equipment and burn down the storage shacks in order to put this old guy out of business. Later that night, they commenced dumping bottles of moonshine all over the place and carrying off with pieces of the still. All the while, the old guy was about 40 feet away, sound asleep in the canvas tent he used to sleep in. After making off with the majority of the copper pipes and such, the group set fire to the shacks. Only the moonshine they had dumped out had flowed down to the old man's tent. They lit fire to the shack. The fire traveled up the shine, and finally to the old man's tent. The canvas tent went up pretty quick and sank down from the melting taking place. The old man sits up very quickly after being awakened by the sounds of his tent immolating. He sat straight up into the sagging tent, pulling the molten canvas taunt over his face. By then the group of hicks were pissing blood, realizing what had happened. The old man was screaming bloody murder as the melting canvas seared his flesh. He ran into the woods, clawing at his melting face as globs of tissue and canvas were dripping off. He ran into the woods screaming and yelling for anyone to help. The next morning, sheriff's office came to check out the smoke which was still coming off the smoldering ground. They just found the tent and what was left of the burnt-down shacks and still. People around here say at night, deep in the woods, you can hear a man running through the woods screaming. Some people say that if you are camping out in Columbus, that you will wake up with the old man pinning you down, screaming at you as he presses his horrible face against yours. All the while, globs of flesh and canvas drip off onto your body. He will do this until you pass out. It's said that Canvas Face still roams around old Columbus County, hunting down the men who destroyed his still and his face.
Not really an urban legend, but I lived a 5-minute walk away from what everyone thought to be an insane asylum. But it was just a home for mentally disabled kids. It was open from around the 1960s to 1998, and afterwards it was just an abandoned building for the local teenagers to hang out. People reported cold spots, electronics not working, footsteps, doors being shut, things thrown, orbs in photographs with faces in the center, if zoomed in on. A general eerie feeling. There was a morgue in the basement, but some say it was never used. There isn't much credible information on the place, but apparently there was a lot of mistreatment of patients resulting in death. Others just say the deaths were a cause of patients not adjusting to the change after being relocated to a different place after it was shut down. Nothing too exciting. They tore it down a while ago.
Southern Californian here. My small town is surrounded by colleges, so I won't tell you exactly where I am. This is a true story. Never told anyone else. A couple years back, I was taking a summer English course, and I only live about 5 miles away, so I always took my bike. I would always pass this one girl, stooped over, walking to class. It was easy to ride my bike. Our town is in a wind tunnel, and I always got a nice tailwind, but walking would seem hellish. Turned out she was taking the same class as me, but would show up 10 to 20 minutes late. She wasn't all that pretty, and none of the people I hung out with could be bothered to say nice things about her. Matted long hair, sunken eyes, thin as a rail. It was obvious she had some serious shit going on. That didn't stop the gossip mongers. They had diagnosed her with AIDS, meth addiction, schizophrenia, and basic stupidity before the third week of class. She always sat in the very back, like she was watching all of us. I generally felt sorry for her, but when she watched us, it was like she could see under our skin. After a while, she stopped coming to class. Some people had a crack to say about it, like she was just paying off her dealer, but they eventually forgot about her. The day after she stopped coming, no one gave her another thought. In everyone's mind, it was like she never existed. But I remembered her. Her eyes weren't on the back of our heads anymore. No one in the room could look deeper than our outermost face. No one could look into our heads anymore. But it still scared me. Eventually, as it got into the summer heat wave, the outside of our classroom began to stink. Our teacher thought it was a problem with our vents, like a rat had died in there. But the smell was definitely coming from the outside part of the room, and within a rare, windless period, the smell just hung there. People stopped coming to class, and I even started using my car to get away from the heat. With only a few days left in class, we finally got a windstorm to save us from the 3-digit temperatures. I was still driving, so I got to class early. I was waiting inside, out of the wind, when I heard a scream. Everyone else was arriving for class. It must be just some girl thinking noise is funny. But she screamed again, and there were shouts. I opened the door and almost walked into a dried-up body swaying in the wind. The girl had hung herself on the tree right outside our classroom, and police said the wind blew her up onto the roof. She was blown off in the second storm. I still don't know her name.
New Zealander here. There's a swimming hole near a river outlet that used to be really popular back in the 50s, until people started to find dead bodies floating there regularly, like in some cases once a week. Other bodies have been found in the lake also, but most of them have been found in the swimming hole. Most of the bodies were of experienced hikers and trampers, and even a few Department of Conservation workers, park rangers. All the bodies had no markings on them, and apparently the autopsies came back inconclusive. The whole forest around the lake is considered tapu, sacred and forbidden, by the local Maori, and they have old stories about beings, the closest English word I can think close to it is fairies, but meh, that live in the forest, and warriors used to go into the forest to prove themselves but never returned. Sometimes I go camping near there during the summer, and have tried to get near there, but they have most of the area surrounded by a very high fence they say is to keep pests out to protect the local wildlife, but who knows?
Oh, that's easy. There's 6 high schools in the area I live, and I went to the one that has been here the longest, built in 1889. Instead of having it be a 2-story high-rise to accommodate all the students way back when, they decided to tunnel underground. We didn't have any math and science buildings, as we like to call them, buildings equipped with sinks, faucets, gas vents, and the like at that time, so the school administration back in 1930 decided to convert the underground classrooms into science facilities for the kids to use. Production was great. Everything was smooth. Kids loved it. There were near 8 classrooms underneath the main hallway that were like this. Now kids started hanging around with the underground classrooms because there was only one stairway to get down there, and it was a long hall-like tunnel enclosed on 3 of the 4 sides, with the 4th side only having the stairs. No windows in any classrooms, and air didn't circulate so well down there. So kids started putting smoke bombs and firecrackers in the classrooms and hallway because of the closed-off area it provided, etc., and caused a major ruckus. So the facility decided to build upper ground science buildings, as this became such a huge issue, even resulting in a kid's asphyxiation because he had improperly made a smoke bomb in an enclosed closet. So they shut off the downstairs to the students, but allowed teachers and researchers from around the area to use the downstairs labs because they were quite well equipped for their time. Things got back to normal, but the staff at the school, after a time, no longer had control over who went down there or not, as it became a city institution. Now there was an influx of even more researchers. The problem now was, no one knew exactly what was going on down there. People would bring things in weird boxes or biohazardous material, and there was no proper way to dispose of it. This is now near the 1960s, because when the facilities were built, they didn't have a designated area for large quantities of hazardous waste, so they had to transport it in and out of the area frequently, with the whole deal regulated by guards and the like. This, of course, presented an opportunity for ballsy students and their ilk to dare each other to visit the laboratories at night to see what the deal was, or look inside the hazardous waste bags when the night shift began its operations, as there was a 1-hour hiatus in between the guard shifts when transporting the goods. Now here is when things become anecdotal, and the urban legend begins. Apparently, a kid named Johnny and his group of friends went to the school late at night and waited for the 1-hour break between shifts so they could go snooping around. Each of them brought a flashlight and not a whole lot else, just their clothes. They looked inside the hazardous waste bags and, to their horror, saw blood and a green goopy-like substance mixed with entrails and small appendages, like fingers and toes. Up for the challenge, the young whippersnappers decided to go down into the lab where no student had gone in nearly 15 or so years, when the lab was turned over to the city. Johnny was met with a foul, acrid stench that turned his bowels. One of his friends puked behind him, retching. The smell permeated the entire hallway. One light was still on in one of the classrooms, but the rest of the lights were off. Determined not to be called out, punk wuss whatever, Johnny started to look in the different classrooms. The first 2 were normal, with the standard equipment of just a school laboratory. The next 2 were a step up, with complicated machines that Johnny nor his friends knew what they did and didn't mess with them. The next 2 were empty, aside from chairs and a blackboard with minuscule calculations and hypotheses scribbled across the board. This all bored Johnny, so he went on ahead as he and his friends couldn't understand what was written in chalk. The next room, though, door number 7, was oddly strange, exceptionally clean, more so than the other rooms with only one surgeon's stool, but a myriad of saws, knives, tubes with weird and strange liquids, and a pressurized container in the corner. Johnny didn't find this too interesting and went back into the hallway towards room number 8, but his friend, Marco, in the news reports, he chose not to have his name disclosed, we'll call him Marco, was puzzled. Why was this room so clean? He spied a white locker in the corner with a weird stain leaking out the base, almost brownish. As he got closer, a putrid smell filled his nostrils. By this time, the other man, Paul, we don't know this one either, had gone back to the hallway and was making his way towards the stairs, done with the whole ordeal. So Marco stepped up to the white locker and wrestled with the lock, getting it open after some time. The door creaked open, and to his utmost horror, he saw a mangled, axed, and dirty head of a man along with his genitalia. Screaming, he fled the room and ran towards the stairs and went through the doors, into the night, leaving both his friends behind. Paul, confused, just thought Marco was being a coward and decided to go back for Johnny. Neither Marco nor Paul had heard from Johnny in nearly 5 minutes, which was odd as Johnny was quite the talker. Paul sauntered up to door number 8 and twisted the old bronze handle that had been worn from prolonged use. He creaked the door open and immediately jumped back and fell, his face a mixture of terror, horror, and disgust. He saw Johnny face down in a lump of blackened, charred flesh, missing a leg, and bleeding profusely from his head. It took a minute for Paul to register just what had happened to Johnny, and by then he noticed too late what was going on in the room. Blood stains were splattered in wild patterns on the wall. Limbs were strewn in heaps across the floor. Mutilated faces, mold, flesh, and maggots created a homogeneous mixture in corners and across walls. Paul puked immediately, was then overcome by bewilderment. How did this happen to Johnny? He spun his head erratically in all directions and, to his horror, spied a lump of flesh pulsing in the corner. Paul stood up and backpedaled quickly, closing in on the door. His mistake. The lump pulsed, moved, and lunged, throwing an appendage Paul's way. Paul grappled with the appendage and managed to loose himself of the grasp and fled towards the door and into the hallway, dropping his flashlight along the way. He made it to the staircase when a low grumble pierced his ears, and a fetid odor escaped into the hallway. Paul fled like hell up the stairs and out the doors, into the cold night. Paul and Marco later met up and called the police, telling them to go investigate. Nothing afterward was released to the public, as Johnny's death was faked to be a biking accident by a hill near the school. The lab was shut down and access was barred. Now, I just graduated high school and this was pretty big around campus and no one knows how true this story is, but Paul is still living today as an old man, and people go to hear the story from him, if they are lucky enough for him to divulge the details. There is an old vent that connects to the lab in the corner of the main hallway, built after the scientists moved in, that people look down into to try to get a look to no avail. I've heard of some people removing the vent to go adventuring down there, but most of the stories are bullshit. To this day, no one knows what really happened down there.
Dude, that's awesome. Name of high school, if you don't mind.
Thorold Secondary School. Imaginative, isn't it? We always like pointing out that TSS also stands for Toxic Shock Syndrome. The school's slogan was, "Seek the highest," which the vast majority of the school did often. And I just found a wiki page for the other tunnel, the Screaming Tunnel, TLDR. The history. The tunnel was for farm irrigation and is from the early 1900s, as almost everything old in Thorold is, since it only started getting set up as a town after the War of 1812. I used to toboggan down hills in Battle of Beaver Dams Park, where people were shooting each other with muskets 97 years ago, and people still dig up knuckle bones and cannonballs and horse skulls in their gardens. A farm girl allegedly burned to death in this tunnel. Some stories have it that she was burned and the body was hid in the rafters to hide evidence. Others have it that she was set on fire by her abusive dad and she hid in the tunnel to die. Neither of these stories have any kind of record. The now. The tunnel is again disused. It's short, only about 20 or 30 meters long, and about tall, with rafters about 5 feet from the concave ceiling. It's muddy through, and oriented into the prevailing wind, which, combined with the rafters, explains the legend. If you go in there and set off a lighter or match, you're supposed to hear a girl scream and it goes out. Revisited it with some friends last time I was in Thorold, and because we're all hard like that, we went in and lit cigarettes. The night was still, and of course, nothing happened.
There's an old fisherman's story that gets passed around in the place where I live. Apparently, the ghost of a drowned fisherman wanders the wharf surrounded by thick mist. Story was that he and his fisherman mates slaughtered some half-drowned sailors whose ship was wrecked about 100 years ago, killed them and stole what salvage they could. The next day, when the fishermen went out to fish as normal, a terrible storm blew up out of nowhere and sunk all the ships, drowning the fishermen. To this day, it is rumored that they wander the seafloor trying to find their way home. Some call it the sailor's revenge.
Tavistock, UK here. There's a fair sample of scary shit in my area, between the more than occasional ritualistic slaughter of sheep happening on the moors just above my house, to the occasional UFO sighting, or even some crazy shit, like decapitated sheep being found in the toilets in the town centre. Surprisingly, there's only one urban legend which comes to mind at time of writing. Legend has it that some divine entity sentenced her to spend eternity doing penance for her evil deeds. She was given the task of travelling each night from Fitz House to Oakhampton Castle in the company of a huge black dog with blood-red eyes and savage fangs. The nightly 30-mile round trip is taken in a carriage made from the bones of her 4 dead husbands and is driven by a headless driver. On reaching the castle, the black dog plucks a single blade of grass from the castle mound. Both dog and blade are returned to the carriage of bones, after which it rattles back to Tavistock. Once the grisly coach has returned to Fitz House, the blade of grass is carefully laid on a flat slab of granite. Only after all the grass has been removed from the castle mound at Oakhampton will Mary be allowed to rest in peace, which, judging by the lush covering, will be a long time away. If the phantom coach should stop outside any house, then an occupant was sure to die, as would anyone for whom the coach stopped on the road. Also, 1. Just outside Tavistock is Grammar Boys Woods, and these are said to be haunted by the ghost of a Georgian gamekeeper. It seems that the old keeper stalks the woods, shooting at anybody he sees, and then vanishes from sight. 2. In the center of town is a tower called Betsy Grimble's Tower, and her ghost is said to appear just before the onset of any national disaster. A policeman saw her ghost just before the Aberfan disaster of 1966. 3. Supposedly beneath the town square is a network of tunnels thought to be associated with the old abbey. Many years ago, 2 clergymen were exploring these tunnels when the ghosts of 2 monks came walking towards them. It is said that the monks bowed reverently and walked on down the tunnel. 4. In the 1500s, a judge lived at Tavistock called Glanville. He had a daughter who had fallen deeply in love with a sailor. However, the judge was having none of this because he had arranged for his daughter to marry a local goldsmith. So to avoid this arranged marriage, the daughter, a servant, and the sailor plotted to murder the goldsmith, which having done so, would mean the daughter would be free of her commitment. The dastardly deed was carried out but somehow went wrong because the trio were caught and arrested. At the trial, Glanville sat in judgment and found all 3 guilty of murder, sentencing them all, including his daughter, to death. The ghost of the daughter is said to haunt the house where she appears, in a bedroom dressed in a cloak and hood. On one occasion, she was seen simultaneously by 3 horrified witnesses.
In my town, there's an old boarding school that was sort of a last-chance school for kids with behavioral problems. It was used through the early 1990s until every single person there just up and left. The weird thing about it was that they'd left everything behind. Clothing was still in drawers, or in one case, on a bed in the middle of being folded. Pots were on the stove with food still in them. Notebooks and papers still on the desks in the classrooms, some with half-finished sentences written on them. It is the damned eeriest thing. The place just seemed frozen in time. And it was completely empty. Naturally, it is a shithole now thanks to vandals and whatnot, but I got a chance to explore it before the site became widely known. I never felt a presence or witnessed any sort of signs of haunting, but I was still genuinely brick-shitting creeped out. Another odd thing is how quiet the campus is. You have to walk through the desert a ways to get there, and you hear crickets and other night stuff. But as soon as you get past the fence, it is a mind-blowing, unearthly quiet.
Back in the days of the cotton boom, Oldham had many peculiar games and pastimes which are all but forgotten. They simply failed to survive into the age of video and television set. The bowling greens and ringer yards of yesterday are all buried now beneath the tarmac on pub car parks. They've gone the way of pewter mugs, cloth caps and park drive-in fives, shawls, cobbles, trams, and tripe. Canned lager, pool, and match of the day have replaced real ale and the more traditional, if less civilized forms of entertainment such as rat baiting, pitch and toss, crown and anchor, frog swallowing, and cut jumping. Who these days, for example, has heard of clog fighting, let alone barrel clogging, a local variation of the theme? The rules were simple. 2 prize clog fighters would climb into a large, open-ended barrel, sit on the rim, and kick away at each other's shins until one or the other had raised his legs out of the barrel in submission. 3 submissions decided the contest. Who, for that matter, will have heard of one of the clogging art's greatest exponents? This monkey's tale began when the landlord of a pub, where prize clogging was a weekly event, was given a gift by his sailor son, a monkey of sorts from foreign parts. Everybody thought it was just an organ grinder's type of monkey, but as time went on, the bugger grew and eventually turned from a cheeky little novelty into a monstrous great ape covered in thick black hair and blessed with a face to shame the devil. Everyone said that the creature should be sent off to a zoo, but the landlord was fond of the beast, for it helped him in the cellar, and by swinging on the gas mantles, it could collect pots even when the pub was packed. "The ape stays," the landlord said. "He might be ugly as sin, but if it comes down to that, the ape's a sight better looking than 3/4 of them that sup in here, and that includes the women." So the ape stayed, and as time went by, it became accepted by all the regulars. And in fact, trade improved, for strangers would come from miles around just out of curiosity to see this wondrous ape that by then had also learned to pull pints of beer and mop tables. The ape was given free run of the place, except that it was not allowed into the pub yard when a clogging event was on, for money was at stake there, and no monkey business or aping about would be tolerated. The ape never showed any inclination towards violence. It just helped around the pub, was pleasant to those that it took to, and never even attempted to enter the yard on a special night. All was well until one fateful Friday when a market trader came in the pub early doors and was kind enough to feed the ape 24 black bananas and 4 pounds of overripe plums he'd not been able to clear from his stall. There was a big event on that night, including a bout between one-legged Mad Jack Maddock of Bolton and Sam Shinbreaker Smith from Glodwick, who were arguably two of the best cloggers in Lancashire at the time. The bout was well underway when fate moved its mighty hand, and the rotten fruit moved the bowels of the ape. Suddenly the ape, seeking the outside privy, tore into the yard like a creature demented. Howling like a banshee and tossing spectators aside like dolls, it hurtled toward the toilet only to find its way blocked by the barrel with the 2 clog fighters in it. Sam and Mad Jack leapt from the barrel and stood their ground, but in seconds the ape had flattened the pair of them, cast the barrel aside and shut itself in the sanctuary of the toilet, where it remained groaning and farting for an hour or more. Back in the bar there was serious business to be attended to. The match was declared abandoned and all betting stakes were returned to their respective owners, that plus a round at the bar from the fight promoters, and the landlord settled the money side of things. All that remained was the matter of the ape's future. Some wanted it destroyed, some wanted it chained. Mad Jack said he wanted it to be kicked in the balls as hard as it had kicked him, but after an hour or two and a quart or two, a decision was reached. The ape had shown such tremendous fighting abilities it was to be kitted out with clogs and trained up for the barrel. The rest is history. The ape took to the noble art of clog fighting like a duck to water, defeating all comers for nearly 20 years. The landlord had a pub that was packed to the doors every night. The public had a fine spectacle to watch at will. The ape had praise befitting his rank, and Oldham had a legend, the famous Phaeton ape. But all good things must come to an end, and suddenly just before an important bout the ape up and died. Nobbling was immediately suspected, but a surgeon of the parish, who drank in the pub between operations, examined the body and declared that death was due to natural causes. The ape was laid out in the parlor, while for 3 days clog fighters from all over England flocked to pay their last respects to the greatest of them all. Unable to bear the sorrow of never seeing the ape again, the landlord had it stuffed for posterity, and for many years it sat in the tap room perched on the rim of half a fighting barrel. Cap on its head, best irons on its feet, looking for all the world like it was ready to do battle at the drop of a hat. And so it remained until one night a passing coach of rugby supporters from Wigan stopped at the pub for refreshment, and when they had gone, the ape was found to be missing. Most likely a Wigan man mistook it for a woman and eloped with it. An easy enough mistake to make for a Wigan man. Where the ape is now, nobody knows, but it's said that on some dark and stormy nights, people passing the pub have heard the clatter of clog irons on the flags and strange moaning noises coming from the lavvy in the yard, as if some animal was in great distress. The only man who ever dared to look over the wall saw a hideous face looking back at him, so hideous that he lost his mind, went teetotal and took up knitting. The end, and yes, this is a real story told around here.
My old guitar teacher and one of his pupils committed mutual self-termination some years ago. He was 41, she was 15. You wouldn't fucking believe the rest. It was like something out of a shitty horror movie. I dropped out of his music school a couple months before because he was batshit insane. Bragged about being the fastest guitar player fucking ever, once interrupted class to ask me to go to the bakery and have a slice of cake with him. I was a tender 12-year-old chick back then. Made random-ass, weird jokes that everyone laughed at anyway. Once I heard him talk about getting a gun license, but paid it no attention. He fell in love with this girl. She'd run away from home and school to meet him. They left messages in each other's Orkut, LOL, I'm Brazilian, comparing themselves to biblical characters, wrote in code and backwards, some freaky-ass shit. Her mother got suspicious and started watching her more closely, eventually asking her to stop meeting him. One night they went to a love hotel, wrote all over the walls in chocolate, I think in blood too, but that may be me making shit up, saying stuff like, nobody can pull us apart, sorry for the mess, hotel crew, and, killed each other.
There's a dirt road around here that we all believe is haunted. It's called Primrose. It's your typical dirt road, completely surrounded by trees and whatnot. One of the strangest parts of the legend states that if you drive down Primrose Road at less than 20 miles an hour, your tires will be slashed. It is also said that if you travel over 30 miles an hour, your vehicle will simply die. In either case, you will have to walk to get help. Cell phones are said to be useless, as you will be unable to get any signal whatsoever. It is stated that while you are walking, you will hear unearthly sounds, and that a ghost will appear telling you to go back to your car because there is danger ahead. Another part of the legend states that while you are walking down Primrose Road, a phantom farmhouse will appear, but that it won't appear long enough for you to investigate. It is also rumored that occult rituals have been performed in the area, and that during one of these rituals, a woman was sacrificed and her body was deposited in a nearby lake. Witnesses claim to have seen the ghost of the woman reliving the ritual on the anniversary of the night she was sacrificed. It is also reported that near the lake where her body was left, that an overpowering sense of sadness can be felt. I've gone down Primrose several times in my life, and each time bricks were shat. I'm in South Bend, Indiana. My friends and I would go to Primrose a lot throughout high school, just for shits and giggles. The first time we ever went, I was driving my mom's brand new car, bought the week before. According to local legend, the woman that haunts the road doesn't like females, so it was always recommended you wear a hood or a mask of some sort. In retrospect, I'm not sure how confusing that would be for a pissed-off ghost, but anyways. So we all wore hoodies and made sure to pull them up right when we pulled onto the road. We were all scared, completely shitless instantly. There was this nasty haze covering the road. I was scared, so I was driving pretty slow. The car was completely silent, except for my best friend in the back seat, insisting that we turn around, when the radio turned itself on, at full blast. Seems kind of silly, but we were scared. I did a U-turn and we hauled ass out of there.
Ellicott City, Maryland, which apparently prides itself on being really haunted. I'm not native to the city, or state or country for that matter, so I'll take their own opinion on it. One or two legends that I know are that past 103 on Bonnie Branch Road, past the Target and Barnes & Noble, or near Bonnie Branch, at one point a couple in a car stopped. They drove for a bit before they had stopped. They were arguing. Eventually it came out that the woman had had an affair. Enraged, the man killed her and cut out her heart. Apparently, some nights down by a creek you can hear her heartbeat. According to some locals, the old colored children's school in historical Ellicott City is haunted as shit. Everyone in Howard County knows about Hell House. Everyone's all, oh my god. It's haunted. No, not really. Most of the rumors surrounding it aren't true. However, continue past it, near Bonnie Branch again, and there are hiking trails. Half of them have urban legends attached to them. The one I went on came to a dead end, where a friend and I saw another destroyed building, only this one had something moving in it.
Small town New Zealand here. Something that's become an urban legend in my town, even though I saw it with my own eyes. There's this kids park and playground with slides and all that shit, really popular with kids and all. It's called Cowhigh Park. On the way to school, me and my friends that biked or walked would meet up at the skate park adjacent to the park. We're standing around there waiting for a friend to turn up, and we see him come over the hill next to the flying fox, and he suddenly stops and vomits all over himself, looking back at the flying fox. So we all bike over to him and see what he's looking at. Some guy had hanged himself from the flying fox. His eyes were bulging out of his head and his face was tear-marked. His legs were hooked into some band thing because the flying fox was too close to the ground for him to hang himself properly. Guy must have been hell-bent to go through that much effort. Anyway, they took down the flying fox and now it's just this empty patch of ground. Apparently, if you go there at night, you can hear sobbing.
Fort Sand in Saskatchewan was a tuberculosis hospital during World War I or World War II. I can't remember. Nowadays it's used for retreats and meetings and workshop kind of deals. Anyways, a lot of people died in there and quite a few of their ghosts stuck around. Lights switch on and off on the second floor. Footsteps can be heard walking up and down the hallway. A haunted tunnel runs between the basement of the main building to some other building. People often see shadowy figures far down the tunnel. There's also an old morgue in the basement. They dare people to stay in there overnight. A lot of people have made attempts, but get too freaked out. There's also some old abandoned houses on the grounds, apparently of the people who ran the hospital during the war. Usually they're locked, but people like to break into them and look for ghosts and such. I haven't actually gone ghost hunting there myself, but I was at a party at one of the lakefront cabins one time, and these two guys claimed they had a recording of some EVPs from one of the abandoned houses. They let me listen to it. I couldn't really make out any words, but there were voices that didn't really sound like either of the dudes.
Ireland here. 19 years ago, my grandpa would drive his friend, who was a doctor who did night shifts, around because his friend didn't like driving at night. He got a call one night and was driving up an old road when they both saw a small old man, about, according to them, the size of a 2-year-old. He gave my grandpa a stare as he drove past. My grandpa drove back seconds later to see that the little old man had vanished. 17 years later, my cousin, who drove trucks, was driving to Cork, bottom of Ireland, very late at night when he saw a small old man about the size of a 2-year-old standing at the side of the road. The old man raised his walking stick and flagged my cousin down. He then told him to stay with him for a few minutes, because there's trouble ahead. So my cousin did so, out of fear. Then after departing, my cousin drove up the road to see that the place he had been going to, an oil storage facility, had exploded. True story /X/.
I don't know the ones from the town I currently live in, since I haven't lived here long, but I'll relate two from a city I lived in once. In Ashland, Kentucky, in the Ashland Cemetery, there's a large bronze statue of a woman on a bench with a rose, weeping. Now, because of the oxidizing copper, she was green, so she was called, yes, that's right, the Green Lady. She was said to be able to move at night, most commonly moving her right hand that was on the bench up perpendicularly. A cooler legend is that of Paramount Joe. Ashland has a historical theater called the Paramount Arts Center. A construction worker in the 1940s was found hanging from curtain rigging. Since then, generally creepy, ghosty things happened, but people in the Paramount generally consider him to be a good ghost. He generally seems to help people out. Billy Ray Cyrus gave the ghost an autographed picture, and when someone tried to take it down, he got angry and messed up everyone else's pictures. So they leave it up on display now. Better stuff happens in Ashland than that, but those are the popular stories.
Newark, California, USA here. Nothing really interesting, one haunted movie theater, which isn't really all that terrifying. I've been in it a few dozen times, mostly late-night shows, and absolutely nothing has happened that I've seen. But if you want the story, here goes. Man finds out his wife was cheating on him, kills her and the lover, starts trying to find a place to hide out till he can flee the country, ends up in the theater, and becomes an hero when the cops follow him in. Now, you can supposedly hear him yelling about his wife's infidelity, as well as threatening to shoot anyone who even thinks of ratting him out. He also popped up on the film screen once or twice, addressed the audience, and told them to fuck off. It's my hiding place, mine. So there you go, /X/. Stereotypical bullshit. But it's about all we have. So, well.
Not really paranormal, but creepy as fuck as it may well be real. I went camping and drinking on the moors with some druggies and alternative folk. Reason for doing so is irrelevant. And one of them told me a story about a guy in a nearby suburb of Leeds in the UK. This guy was camped on the moors when some guy came to his tent and tortured him with a knife, eventually cutting both his ears off and leaving him for dead. The victim eventually escaped, and then the person telling me the story said the victim had the attacker assassinated, but I doubt that part of the story is true. But still, the idea of a crime so brutal happening on your doorstep is terrifying.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel, as more Greentext will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.